This is the result of the extreme left and PC crap.
When I hear people starting to complain about political correctness, and I understand why people might push back on it, but to me, that's a red flag.
All right, so actress Julia Louis-Dreyfus pushed back a little bit on her Seinfeld co-star Jerry Seinfeld over his recent comments about the extreme left, PC crap, woke culture ruining comedy. Now, I want to play for you his comments first, just to be clear on what he said, as he kind of contradicts himself, as that the last portion of his comments were not being broadcasted as widely as the beginning of his comments. And then we'll get to Julia Louis-Dreyfus and her comments. That this is just a nice break from the usual news. All right, so let's just talk about comedy and culture and the potential impact that culture has on comedy. Here's Jerry Seinfeld's comments. This is recently with the New Yorker.
Nothing really affects comedy. People always need it. They need it so badly, and they don't get it. It used to be you would go home at the end of the day. Most people would go, oh, Cheers is on. Oh, MASH is on. Oh, Mary Tyler Moore is on. All in the Family's on. You just expected there'll be some funny stuff we can watch on TV tonight. Well, guess what? Where is it? This is the result of the extreme left.
All right, let me just stop, pause for a second here. I don't know what he is talking about here. There are more options than ever. You could maybe, if you want to complain about this, you can complain that there is less of a monoculture where people, at the end of the day, all watch the same thing. But there is more comedy than there ever was, with so many options, be it, YouTube, TikTok, Disney Plus, Netflix, Paramount. I mean, there are too many streaming options. So this idea that there isn't anything funny on TV is really bizarre. And then he goes on to blame the left for the lack of comedy that doesn't exist.
Watch on TV tonight. Well, guess what? Where is it? This is the result of the extreme left and PC crap and people worrying so much about offending other people. Mm-hmm. When you write a script and it goes into 4 or 5 different hands, committees, groups, here's our thought about this joke. Well, that's the end of your comedy. They move the gates like in skiing.
Yeah. Okay. And on this part, this always existed in television. I know because this existed at Seinfeld. I know because I listened to the commentaries when those DVDs first came out. And there was, Larry David was on there discussing how certain things would be sent back and then he would freak out over it. That it was very normal for network TV executives to push back on a variety of topics that were in scripts they didn't want to touch for whatever reason. I mean, that's part of the reason for the episode they have about masturbation, where they don't necessarily discuss it directly, but they discuss around it. And that added to the comedy of it, the fact that they weren't really allowed to directly discuss it. Same thing as it applies to the episode where I think it's some reporter for a New York newspaper thinks that Jerry and George are gay. And they have to keep saying, not that there's anything wrong with that. And just like go on this thing where they're trying to make it clear that, hey, we're not gay, but it's okay if you are gay. Like this has always existed in many forms. So this idea that, TV executives or that scripts never went into any hands, and somehow back in the 90s or in the 80s, that scripts went directly from the writers to television is simply untrue. Now, this last part is the part that I feel like it has not really been as widely discussed, where he sort of contradicts everything he just said.
Here's our thought about this joke. Well, that's the end of your comedy. They move the gates like in skiing. Yeah. Culture, the gates are moving. Your job is to be agile and clever enough that wherever they put the gates, I'm going to make the gate.
So after complaining about how culture has changed and you can't even say anything anymore, he then goes to discuss how culture changes. And it's your job as a comedian to find out where those gates are and make the gate. Completely contradicting everything he just complained about. It's a very bizarre. I don't think he really has a fully fledged out thought around this. At least it appears he doesn't, based on him, clearly saying two different things here. But now we get to Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who I think her thoughts are a little more put together.
Recently made news for talk.
So to be clear, this is with the New York Times interview with interviewer Lulu Garcia Navarro.
About political correctness in comedy. And so I'm just wondering, as a famous comedian yourself, what you think about that.
I think that if you look back on comedy and drama, both, let's say 30 years ago, through the lens of today, you might find bits and pieces that don't age well. And I think to have antenna about sensitivities is not a bad thing. And it doesn't mean that all comedy goes out the window as a result. When I hear people starting to complain about political correctness, and I understand why people might push back on it, but to me, that's a red flag because sometimes it means something else. I believe being aware of certain sensitivities is not a bad thing. I don't know how else to say it.
Now, there's a second part that I'll get to in a minute here, but she does say as well, though, earlier in the interview, like Jerry Seinfeld did in either the New Yorker piece, or it was a different interview where he said that you couldn't make Seinfeld today. I don't know why people think this. Seinfeld was not. You could argue it maybe push certain topics in some ways that other shows didn't, fine. But Seinfeld is still popular. Like, it's not like Seinfeld has been banished to sidelined because it was so offensive. No, people still love and watch Seinfeld. Not to mention there are shows like Curb Your Enthusiasm, which people could argue in many ways is more offensive and more offensive today than Seinfeld was back then. Or It's Always Sunny, which is, if you haven't watched It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, they go hard in that show in any way possible. But it's how you broach these topics and do it in a way that is both understanding of the material, but not afraid to also just discuss these topics that many people think you can't discuss in comedy, when they can be discussed if you do it in a way that is actually funny. Like, again, It's Always Sunny, I think, does that the best out of any modern comedy I've seen. Now, there are a few more comments here from Julia.
So I was wondering if you'd been thinking about anything from our previous conversation.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that I answered this whole idea of political correctness correctly, and I can't really remember what I said. So I sort of wanted to go back to that and be sort of very clear about where I stand.
Mm-hmm.
My feeling about all of it is that political correctness, I mean, insofar as it equates to tolerance, is obviously fantastic. And of course, I reserve the right to boo anyone who says anything that offends me, while also, respecting their right to free speech, right? But the bigger problem, and I think the true threat to art and the creation of art, is the consolidation of money and power. And all this siloing of studios and outlets and streamers and distributors, I don't think it's good for the creative voice. So that's what I want to say in terms of the threat to art.
So this is a much more articulate way to make a point that you could argue Jerry Seinfeld was maybe trying to make. But instead, he put the blame on the extreme left and PC culture and woke, when the reality is The actual barrier is the concentration of money and power. Now, with that said, as I said earlier, there are many, like in terms of streamers, streaming platforms, many options. But when it comes to, the let's say the class of people that control those streaming platforms, they're all the same. So that's really where something like, TikTok or YouTube comes in, and I think helps to fill that void a little more, because there is less of a barrier between the content or the creative and the viewer. But Julia Louis-Dreyfus clearly is not, falling for this, blaming the PC woke crowd, when that is clearly not the problem. Like, that's, I've done videos on, whether it's Dave Chappelle and his incessant, ongoing obsession with talking about trans people in either in an uninformed way or a derogatory way. That, like, there are people that do trans jokes that are not stupid. Like, it's not as if there are topics you can't discuss or touch. You can touch any topic. It's how you discuss those topics. It's how you find the comedy. So, yes, there are going to be people that, regardless of what you say, regardless of what you discuss, regardless of the joke, there are going to be people that may find something offensive or may bother them. It's also important to realize those people are not the ones controlling the platforms. It is money, it is power, it is executives. So, some complaints online clearly hasn't done a whole lot. You look at someone like Dave Chappelle, someone like Joe Rogan. They still have their platforms. They still have hundreds of millions of dollars. They still have massive audiences. So allow people to express themselves. Things are going to change. Culture is going to change. There's going to be pushback if you say something that is ignorant. That has always existed for decades. It isn't just a new thing. The only difference now is that there is the internet, and it is discussed more. It is widely publicized on a you could argue a greater scale, but it's always existed. So to continue focusing on, woke PC culture when culture has always grown and changed with the times is, to me, so completely bizarre and completely misses what Julia Louis-Dreyfus hits on, which is the power centers and money at the center of entertainment.